Thereafter, we'll have a short intermission between each group, and then we'll bring up the next group, so forth and so on. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to education, and we'll hear what they have to say.
All right, so as you heard, we are the education pod of research interns, and we are so excited to present to you our recommendations for Parent Revolution. As many of you know, Parent Revolution is a nonprofit group with the goal of giving parents a voice in their children's education. They do this mainly through leveraging the Parent Empowerment Act, which is a landmark piece of legislation that came through California government in 2010. Basically how it works is they give the bureaucratic process of school reform a more democratic face and give parents a seat at the table. The way the law works is that if you take a failing school, one that is shown to be failing from its performance on API tests and things of that nature, and if 51% of the parents in that district or in that school vote to transform their school, and they can undertake one of 4 options. They can replace the school staff, including teachers, replace school leaders like principals or administrators, establish charter school management of that school, or shut down the school entirely. Parent Revolution specifically helps the parents in their campaign to transform their schools and take advantage of this law. So we have talked to the parents, we have looked at the data, and we've studied Parent Revolution and their process. And we've come to answer the question that how can Parent Revolution make this process more transparent, inclusive, and effective in helping the parents transform their schools. So the way that we've chosen to undertake this is to look at 2 parallel case studies of schools in the LA area. First of these is 24th Street Elementary School, not too far away. It is a chronically underperforming school, and parents had been finding the administration uncooperative in their efforts to change something about this. So eventually what happened is they went through the petition gathering process and were able to transform their school, and it is now partially operated by a charter management. Lennox Middle School is the school we'll be comparing it to. They actually did not result in a petition campaign. They were similarly underperforming over the course of many years, but they were able to work with the district and not go through the process of gathering the 51% of signatures. So the way that we figured would be most effective to go through this is to kind of trace the development of each of these schools' campaigns through the process. I'll start out by giving an overview of how potential schools are identified, including the numbers and the climates that make them ripe for transformation. Then Chris will take that and talk about how the potential can be turned into developing an organization. Casey will continue with organizing the parents and how that can build support in their community and rally them around this cause. Claire's going to continue with diving into the process itself, the legal aspects, and the district negotiations. Vicki will close us out with where the schools are now, and then also looking somewhat at the branding aspects of this campaign and some of the public relations as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So the way that Parent Revolution generally works is they start with a comparative analysis using testing scores and things of that nature. If you look at this graph, it shows the API scores of the last several years in both Lennox Middle School and 24th Street. Imagine looking at this as a parent who doesn't necessarily know what an API score is or what it means. The goal of 800 on this index is set by California state standards. It's a very general aspect, and it's not necessarily relevant to every school district as far as the goals that they're setting. What's useful to do here is to contextualize it a little bit. I've shown on here the averages of the districts of both of the schools, and as you can see, both of them are markedly lower than their district averages, particularly 24th Street. I found all this information online, kind of pulling from a lot of different databases, but from talking to organizing director Christina Sanchez and lead organizer Jesus Sanchez, we learned that a lot of these parents don't actually have internet access. And if they do, they don't have access to the material that's needed to contextualize these scores and make good use out of them. So our recommendation with relation to this is to inform the parents, is to give them a way to have access to this information if they don't have internet access, and give them a way to understand what's going on in their schools. As you know very well, numbers aren't everything, especially when it comes to academic test scores. We are going to be entering something of a testing vacuum, so it's called in the next couple of years with taking down the CSTs. However, there are other kinds of statistical analysis that can be useful even with the absence of this. One of these things is the culture. There are different ways that you can use statistics to actually assess the culture of the schools. One of the ways that's commonly thrown out by academics to do this is to look at special populations, such as English language learners, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students. But what we found from looking at the data was that that's not necessarily that different from the districts. themselves as far as pinpointing specific schools that could use reform. Something that we found that was significant was suspension rates. As you can see, they're kind of small in my little bar graph up there, but relative to their districts, both of these schools have significantly higher suspension rates than their districts. And this can be indicative of a pervasive culture of underachievement, which is definitely something that can lead to parents that are willing and ready to reform. There's also something to be said for the history of the schools and parent activism and their relationships with the districts that already exist. So with all of this information put together, basically my general recommendation is to look at those statistics, all of the different statistics and the ways they can be contextualized, and then make the parents aware of that before even entering the communities to figure out what's the best way to move forward before investing resources. Once you have that data at your fingertips, where do you go with that? Where do you go with the momentum, and then how do you get the parents involved? And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, my name is Chris, and I'll be talking about parent involvement and the process of creating these parent union chapters. And so the very first question is, why are parent unions needed? Parent unions are needed because there is a fundamental disconnect between school administrators and parents themselves. And so we know that community organizing equals parent power. And so I've looked at previous organizations and campaigns from cities like New York and Chicago where parents came together and campaigned. And I sort of looked at what they did, what worked, what tactics did not work, and sort of came up with these conclusions. There are 3 key outcomes for parent unions: development of community leaders, building of relationships, and raising critical consciousness. And as we'll see throughout this presentation, these are recurring themes. Parent unions are needed to build social capital. Social capital refers to the relationship and the trust made between parents, the key stakeholders, to form a collective action. And this can lead to the connection between parents, schools, community, and the school officials. Within these parent unions, you need a core organizing team. And for these parent union chapters, it's called steering committee. These are 5 to 10 extremely dedicated parents that are willing to do more and lead these parents. And some of these positions include research coordinator, logistics coordinator, policy, recruitment, and media. So the current state of parent union chapters, this is where Parent Revolution comes in. They do a really good job in providing these resources to these parents. For instance, they provide weekly training, parent development workshops, and info sessions. These topics include, how to build a base for parents. What is a union? How do they work together? How to analyze school data. Teaching parents how to evaluate these schools. As Elizabeth has said, these parents, when they first started, they didn't really know what API scores were, and they didn't really know what was going on in these schools. So these workshops help them learn more about the curriculum, what can be done, and also learn what the LA Board of Education, what is their role. In addition, there are also open forum for parents. This is a great place for parents to come together and voice their concerns, have one-on-one conversations with one another, come together, have group dialogue, and voice their concern, and also it creates a strong sense of community. I got the chance to talk to several parents, 2 key parents that were extremely involved in the Lenox Middle School campaign. Their names are Mirna Hernandez and Shannon Thomas Allen. And Shannon actually just got elected to the Lenox School Board, which is a key critical win for these parents, mainly because at the school board you're given a voice to help set policy and help set the budget for the school districts. And so throughout the conversation with Shannon, I was very impressed by how engaged she was with this education issue and how she really wanted to see change within her school district. And so some of the things that we talked about was to keep using Parent Empowerment Act as leverage. Parents' first intention is not to transform these schools. They don't want to use the parent trigger law. They really want to negotiate with these school administrators first. And so They try not to be as confrontational as people perceive them in the media. Being transparent is key for all stakeholders. This relates to social capital, where you need to build the trust with the teachers, the parents, the school administrators, and then parents helping parents. This goes back to have current parents, past parents, incoming parents, connect them together so parents can stay united and form this parent advocate group. Some of the events they can do could be neighborhood walks, potlucks, luncheons, events that can keep building this network and keep parents in a cohesive unit. Last but not least, she mentioned how you can never underestimate the willingness of parents. As we can see that small victories, like for instance, getting elected to school board or getting the LA Board of Education more transparent on giving data, these are small victories. And these small victories are very important because it leads to people, it keeps parents engaged. And Shannon has told me that parents actually went up to her and asked her for guidance just because of looking at the Lenox Middle School campaign, how it was successful in negotiating with the school district, the school administrators. Based on talking to Shannon and my research, there are still ways to improve. For instance, there is a need for more workshops on different topics, like developing organizing and civic skills. These can be skills like how to negotiate, how to deal with confrontation, compromise, learning how to develop new leaders. Dealing with opposition is basically learning how to be calm and collective with the opponents, with the opposition to teacher unions and opposing parents. Continue setting manageable goals. As I said earlier, small victories keep parents engaged. So set smart goals, attainable and measurable goals. Expand some roles in steering committees. This also ties into the last point, the broad strategy to include district level campaigns. Some of these roles include, for instance, community outreach. It's very important to connect with the local community. This could be reaching out to local churches or groups that can assist these parents and also help out Parent Revolution. We can, by expanding the strategy, we can mobilize these union chapters and then try to broaden this into a more district-wide committee. So instead of individual school committees, you can have all these parents from different districts and different schools come together and form a bigger group, and so they can form more strategic relationships. And this goes back to parents helping parents. If parents from a school from a district wants to see changes in their school, they can go back to the parents that have already been there, done that, and use this as an extra resource for them to start up their own parent union chapters. So by equipping these parents with these tools and resources, parent union chapters can be more self-sustainable and even grow. And with that said, Casey will talk more about the campaigns itself in these two schools, 24th Street Elementary School and Lenox Middle School.
My name is Casey. I'm going to talk to you about the actual process that parent union chapters, with the assistance of Parent Revolution, take to go and gather their 50+% signatures from parents in the community. I'm going to talk to you about both 24th Street and Lenox, and the route that I took towards my research was pretty interesting because I had the chance to analyze the differences and similarities in both processes, seeing as how 24th Street had an actual campaign and Lenox didn't, but Lenox had its own strategies towards informing their parents about what was going on in their school than 24th Street did. Both were pretty successful campaigns, I would say, in different ways, and I'm going to talk first about 24th Street. So 24th Street, the parent union was very interactive in the way that they gathered support for the petition. They went door to door to houses in the community. They didn't have any information from the school as to which parents lived in which houses or which communities. So they literally went door to door to every house around 24th Street looking for parents who might have children who attend the school. Shockingly, they raised more than the required 51% petition signatures. They raised about 70%, representing 369 students in the school. They also had the opportunity to hold weekly meetings in a local park, the park that was familiar with, that the neighbors in the community were familiar with. And when they would go to the park and hold their meetings, they would walk up to random parents and ask them if they had children attending 24th Street, inform all of the parents, regardless of whether or not they had children attending the school, what was going on in the community. They really took it upon themselves to make sure the information was out there, that they could do everything that they could do to make sure the parents were informed about what was going on without school support. After they gathered their 69% of the signatures, they held an election, and this election would determine which of the two trigger options they had recommended to parents on the petition when they signed it. The first being an in-district reform type option, and the second being the option that they chose, which was to partner with a charter organization. In that election, 190 of the parents who actually signed the petition came out to vote, which is fairly successful, seeing as how a lot of parents in the community work day and night. They don't have necessarily the time to be as involved as they would like to be. And so after this election, 21st Street decided on their charter organization bond, as you will. And as I said, when they went door to door, they gave out a lot of information about the process, and this is very commendable on their part. They gave out packets, including this form. There were many forms in the packet, but this one kind of has an overview of everything that they gave out. They were dedicated to informing parents of what Parent Revolution was, what the Parent Empowerment Act is, what it allows parents to do under law, so legally, what their rights were. They gave them many of the options for transformation and which of the options they felt were the best, which strategy they felt parents needed to take towards reforming 24th Street. And yeah, they had a pretty successful campaign, as I said. Lennox, on the other hand, as I said, did not have to implement a campaign to gather petition support. When they began their campaign, there was changes in the school board. So Barbara Flores came in as the new superintendent of the Lennox district, and she was able to work with them from the beginning and get their needs assessed. So they didn't have a process actually go on. And that's going to lead me into kind of some of the common concerns that I found when I was doing my research. There was a significant amount of opposition from parents in these communities to the process, and whether that was because they really did agree with what Parent Revolution was doing, or that they weren't informed, which is my guess. I think that that's a significant issue when the act is to empower the parents. I don't think there should be parent opposition. So I think that my major recommendations have to do with getting out there and making sure that every parent is informed on the 24th Street end. And this is, Parent Revolution does a great job of informing parents. I think that it can be taken a step forward as far as working with the Board of Education to reform some of the policies around the law to mandate that schools actually have to inform the parents in their schools of when a campaign is going on. There's a lot of privacy laws and policy issues that have to do with the schools being able to release information to Parent Revolution, which is why I think the best option would be to actually work with the schools to make sure that they release the information to the parents, and then give the parents the option of working or releasing their information to Parent Revolution. Things like that. That would work as far as policy issues. For Lennox, I think it should be considered having some sort of campaign, regardless of how you're working with the district. I think the campaign on 24th Street and a couple of the other schools that I looked into were very successful in informing the parents of what was going on in the process. So whether or not you need the petition signatures or anything like that, I think it's worth it to have the campaign, have the campaign so that you're going door to door and you're knocking, you're speaking to parents, they know who you are, and you're building that sense of trust with them. A lot of what I've talked about is going to come up again when we talk about the actual negotiation that each school went through with the district, and then how the parent revolution and the parent unions are marketed and branded to other organizations, which causes some of this opposition. So I'm going to turn it over to Claire, who's going to lead more into the negotiation process.
Why do they deserve a voice in the decision-making process? And when it comes to where to move forward with the school, parents truly have their kids' interests in mind and only those interests, whereas teachers and administrators might have different agendas. So that kind of sets the playing field of why are parents a group of people who we need to empower and make a larger part of that decision-making process. So on Parent Revolution website, there's a kids first pledge, and you sign the pledge, I sign the pledge, and so in order to dive into that process of the district negotiations, it's important to emphasize why that's the focus in the first place. So as this is a tale of two schools, I'll explain how that process unfolded in both 24th Street Elementary and Lenox Middle School, kind of keeping in mind the framework of to what extent were the parents empowered through this process. So I'll start with going over the charter conversion process, and for many of you this is familiar. Under No Child Left Behind, there's the public school choice kind of model of reform. And it's, as Elizabeth said, it's a pretty bureaucratic process. It starts at the local level. You can appeal at the county level and the state level. And the law is intended to give schools an option for reform. But the way that it works out is that if it fails at the local level, it's really hard to appeal. It's a bureaucratic process led by the district and not by parents. So the parent empowerment law kind of outlines the request for proposal process, which makes the process more democratic. If you do get that 50% of the votes, then you can undergo a process of your own. And it's a faster process. It speeds it up from 5 years to 3. So when you're looking at 24th Street Elementary in this framework, they actually tried the public school choice option and it didn't get passed. The administration kind of laid out their own path, but it didn't really lay out an actual transformational change that the school needed. And to emphasize what Elizabeth said, these are persistently failing schools. They're not just going in and messing up a great school environment. This is a failing school, and they attempted to change the process and it failed. So that was why the parent empowerment law was ultimately needed for them to undergo this process. So Lenox Middle School did not end up using the parent empowerment law, so the recommendations for them are different. I came up with a term myself called the parent mandate. In political science, we throw around the term, the presidential mandate, that if you win by a substantial margin, you kind of have a mandate and the authority to go ahead and implement the policies that you emphasize during your campaign. And similarly with the parent empowerment law, only a majority of parent signatures is needed, yet in the schools that enact pull the trigger, they have an overwhelming amount. 24th Street did end up having 69% of Desert Trails and 70% of parent signatures. So my recommendation is to establish a stronger connection between the signatures and the ultimate reform that gets passed, and to emphasize that when you have 70% of parents who want to outline a certain path for change, that's something that needs to be taken seriously. So then to contrast that with Lenox Middle School, that did not end up pulling the trigger. It's kind of just a different set of policy recommendations that come in when you're looking at that process. The parents kind of went to the superintendent, Barbara Flores, with their concerns, and from the beginning it was very collaborative. She wanted to listen to what they had to say, and together they conducted the needs assessment and figured out where to go from there. So it is a very different process, and I think something that we've learned is that there's no normal way about going about school change, and it is really individualized. So it was interesting for us to see that how different the processes were, that Lenox Middle School didn't even have to start this campaign and get the parent signatures. And so where I'm going with that is that this is kind of starting a trend towards making parents more involved in the decision-making process. So for 24th Street, they did have to pull the trigger, and you would commend them for all their success, but in the first place, you're kind of wondering why it took that in order for the district to realize that parents should have a voice in the process. So when you're talking about school transformation, it's important to note the intangible aspects that came out of it. Vicki will talk about kind of the concrete, where are they now, what did they get past, but I'm just going to talk about the culture that was changed as a result of these campaigns. So for 24th Street Elementary, the parents are actually now in the committee that hired the principal and that hires the new teachers. In Lenox Middle School, Shannon Thomas Allen was elected to the school board, as Chris said. So when you look at the word revolution, in the American Revolution, it kind of started over TVing tax too much, and then it turned into representation in government and the decision-making process, and it seems that that's really what this is about for Parent Revolution too. Shannon Thomas Allen talked about how their main concern for Lenox Middle was that they didn't have, their food wasn't nutritious enough. It started over nutrition concerns, and by the end, as Chris said, she's energetic about being a voice in the process. So this transformation is really about empowering parents, letting them know for themselves that they do deserve a strong voice in this process and that they do deserve a voice at the table. And not only that, but once they're given that voice, they can bring about true change for their children. So in terms of the future of parent empowerment, my recommendations are twofold. For schools that do have to pull the trigger, kind of just strengthening the connection between the amount of signatures that they get and the change that ultimately happens in the parent mandate. But in terms of Lenox Middle School, when you didn't have a campaign, it's kind of just transforming that culture and making it so that it's an established part of the school decision-making process that parents are involved. So ironically, the future, I think, of parent empowerment is that the law won't even be needed. There shouldn't be these campaigns launched against the school district, because from the start they should acknowledge that parents are worthy, their opinions are worthy of consideration, and that they truly have their children's interests in mind, and so that should be given a greater voice. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Vicki.
The biggest change at 24th Street is that there's this new symbiotic relationship between public and private education. 24th Street is now run by both LAUSD and a charter school called Crown Preparatory Academy. LAUSD runs classrooms from K to 4th, and Crown Prep has classrooms from 5th through 8th. In terms of the parent union, their new focus is to volunteer at the school. So they have a group of about 30 to 40 volunteers that take turns going to the school every day. In addition, they're working on recruiting parents at the school to join their union. For Lenox, the biggest change they have is the introduction of new elective classes and also security staff to address their safety issue. The school also has a newly established college-going culture. In terms of the parent union, they're still extremely active. So like what Claire and Chris have been saying, Shannon, one of the parent organizers at Lenox, recently ran for school board and won. They're also working on a collaborative project with Lenox and with Parent Revolution to create parental development workshops to continue to inform and empower parents. Last but not least, they're looking to expand and build onto their foundation by going to elementary schools whose children will eventually move on to Lenox and talk to these parents for opportunities for them to get involved with the parent union as well. So as you can see, regardless of the fact whether or not they actually utilize the Parent Empowerment Act, both schools are taking productive steps to create better schools for their children. The second part of my research is kind of taking a look at some branding opportunities for Parent Revolution. So I started off by doing some internet research just to see what kind of stuff the media has been saying, some rumors, criticisms, and I found some interesting things. The first main rumor from the media is the claim that Parent Revolution has questionable funders. There was an article that was posted on Alternate in April, pointing out the fact that Parent Revolution's biggest benefactor was the Walton Family Foundation, who contributes up to 43% of Parent Revolution's funds. Now, the Walton Family Foundation is extremely well known for being anti-union and for also being a supporter of the expansion of charter schools. So while Ben Austin has come out with statements saying that these funders really have no influence on the organization whatsoever, there's still a lot of speculation on the media as to whether or not that's actually true. The second criticism is about the law itself. There was an article posted on the LA Times in June calling the Parent Trigger Law a trap, saying that its failure to require an open public process causes some parents to be misinformed, and in some cases that parents are actually unaware that there's a campaign going on until after the changes have been implemented. And then something that is not necessarily criticism, but what I found was very interesting, is the use of this nickname, Parent Trigger. So the law that Parent Revolution passed is actually called the Parent Empowerment Act, yet no one actually uses this name. Instead, they use this nickname, Parent Trigger. And what's funny is that no one actually knows where this nickname came from. I talked to a couple people within the organization, and they said that they actually, they don't know where this nickname came from, which means it may have well came from the media. And when talking to Marina, the parent organizer from Lenox, she said that parents automatically associate Parent Revolution with the phrase Parent Trigger, which can be problematic because it sometimes prevents them from being able to look at the bigger picture. So with all this information, we have a couple of recommendations for you. The first step is to diversify funders, to be able to highlight a broader range of funding options so that the media is unable to be able to claim that this organization is controlled by one funder or another. The second step is to have third-party endorsements. We know that parent revolution is sometimes met with a lot of hostility when entering a community, and we think that by having third-party endorsements, someone within the community to vouch for the organization will be very helpful. Someone such as LAUC board members, depending on what district you're working with, teachers within the community, or even parents from past campaigns could be very helpful. The third step is to have marketing research, to talk to your audience and see what they think of you. We think it would be a great idea to have focus groups or one-on-one interviews with parents who have gone through the campaign process and ask them what Parent Revolution has done that benefits them the most and what they can work on so they can help improve these parents' campaign experiences. The fourth recommendation is brought to you by Matt Rodriguez, the founder of Rodriguez Strategies. I had a chance to talk with him about some of the research that we've been doing, and this is what he said. He thinks that Parent Revolution is kind of an ambiguous name. When compared to an organization such as Students First, they make it very clear what the goal of the organization is to put students first. So to have a slogan that clearly states the goal of the organization, something simple like empowering parents for better schools, would help clear up any confusion that the public may have. And last but not least is to have message consistency. So an article on the Public Manager says that it takes 7 exposures for a viewer in order for them to be able to recall an ad. So if it takes 7 exposures for a parent in order for them to understand what Parent Revolution does, it's extremely important that the message that they receive every single time is consistent, especially if they're talking to someone who's not actually part of the organization. For example, if they're talking to a member of the parent union. All right, and wrapping it up, in conclusion, these are the main recommendations that we as a group have for Parent Revolution. Number 1, to use statistics and school histories to focus resources before campaigns actually begin. To assist parent unions in developing relationships with the community, and mobilize steering committees to include a district-wide strategy. To develop regulations to ensure that schools will help inform parents on future campaigns. Establishing stronger connections between parent signatures and school transformation, ultimately so that the law is no longer needed. And lastly, to introduce third-party endorsements to help ease Parent Revolution's transitions into future communities. Thank you for listening. We would now like to open up the floor for questions.
Very good. So we have about 20, 25 minutes or so to open up for questions from our audience. So I'll go ahead and see who will be that brave soul to offer up that very first question. As Allie sits there, and I know I should have some.
Hey, Ellis, be nice, remember.
Only questions are hard. Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely start.
Even a critique is wonderful as well.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think I've heard a lot from you guys is saying that we need to reach out to all parents and increase the transparency in this process, which is something that we really, really value. But it's also a real struggle for us in that we have the district and the media saying, criticizing, saying, well, you're not reaching all parents. But as you mentioned, well, we don't have access to those lists. Give them to us, and we'll gladly try and reach all parents. We will gladly make sure every single parent knows what's going on. So how can we incentivize districts to give us these lists if, at the end of the day, what we're doing is changing the power structure to take some of their power away? So how can we incentivize them to share information with us?
Anyone want to tackle that?
I kind of recommended working on the policy end, and in the same way that when the law was initially introduced, it didn't really have specific regulations. It didn't really tell you how to use the law. In the same way that you guys went back in and you kind of outlined what it is, like you have to have this.
The regulations.
You have to, yeah, you pretty much to kind of go back and do that again and kind of work with the school board, work around FERPA and the other privacy regulations, and mandate that schools actually inform their parents of when a campaign is happening, because in my opinion, it's hindering the parents that they don't know, and that's something that the school should be responsible for. So I think if you guys can try and go more on the policy, because there's, I mean, like I said, there's it's kind of like impossible for them to give you the list of names because that's like directly saying, oh, FERPA out the window because it's like the first line of it, like they cannot release the information without parent consent. But if they can go in and tell, have the schools inform all the parents of when a campaign is happening and give the parents the option of having their information released to you, that at least opens the door for some parents who might be interested.
Yeah.
So that's like, I'm not saying that's gonna like throw all parents at you, but that's like another option to get some more parents into the process.
Yeah, and I think that kind of starts, interestingly, from like the branding perspective. I think that there's a lot of mixed images on what people associate with Parent Revolution and the trigger, and it kind of just seems very contentious, like against a school district, and it shouldn't be. I know that it's out of your control that people kind of just associate you with kind of anti-union and an agenda behind you, but if you could have like a more solidified like brand and like consistent, I think the 7 exposures I think was important in terms of just solidifying your brand and just making it kids first, kids first, kids first. Our approach is empowering parents, and it shouldn't be one versus the other. It should kind of just be accepted by everyone that parents should have a voice in this process. And once you kind of just reach the acceptance that the goal of the organization isn't to go against and take away their power, it's to give parents power where they ultimately deserve it in the first place. I don't understand how a district could say, no, we don't think that parents should be informed about the things that are going on right now, when you take it from an approach that's not really as like much of an attack. Not that that's what you guys are doing.
Why do you think a district would be resistant to that?
You do?
Why do you think a district might be resistant to parents having power?
I think that, as I said in my first slide, clearly the administration and teachers do have other interests in their minds when it comes to education reform. They're thinking about themselves. I mean, I don't want to kind of make assumptions, but I think that like a big foundation of Parent Revolution is that the first thing that's on parents' mind is what's best for their children, and that should be what the transformation process is kind of focused around, is who cares the most about, who's only thinking for the kids and what are their opinions and how can we move forward with those opinions.
Did you have another comment?
You know, I think in order to get lists, agreed that we operate schools, some of which are transformation schools, but it would take a policy change or some kind of order, because the self-interest of the administration that's performing poorly is simply not to hand over a list. I mean, no one misunderstands their self-interest that badly. I mean, so it would have to almost be required. Having said that, they can do it. I mean, FERPA says you can't give out information about gender, you can't give out information about special ed status or whatever. We agreed on some schools that are not as anti-charter that feed into our schools will give us their feeder discs, and schools trade feeder discs all the time. I mean, even within 2 LAOC schools, if Washington, we operate 2 schools at Henry Clay Middle School, if Washington Prep wants our feeder disc, we give it to them, and they're not agreeing with that school. So you can release contact information. The only question is, you probably won't. I mean, it would get released to us sometimes for, like I said, for student recruitment purposes. If that school all of a sudden was triggered, though, Green Dot would never get that data again, because it is their choice at the local level. So it's not so much a FERPA violation just for contact info as it is a matter of just they perceive it not to be in their self-interest. And no one gives up power. Power is always taken. So if you're running the school, even if you're not running it badly, the chances are you see, well, I'm doing the best I can, or we're making changes as incremental as they are. We've improved. You saw Lennox Middle School was going up a bit when we had the data slides. So they're going to self-justify that and say that we can't do it. So I think that's just going to be a perennial challenge. I don't know how to do it unless you had a change to the law that required the school, once the trigger was once the petition was initiated, and to then say both sides have equal access to all the data. But it would probably take a policy change.
I mean, as I said in like my slide, a big part of it is kind of like expanding that reach more, but with 70% of signatures, I think that you guys already do have that parent mandate, like you do have 20% over what's needed. So I think kind of just emphasizing that, like moving forward, like if the campaign is something that you guys are considering and they're thinking about withholding information, it's kind of like, we'll look at these past, like we will get 70% of the signatures, like there's no way that you can say that these parents don't have a voice. So maybe, I don't know, taking over the media and kind of just emphasizing that in like your brochures, that it's kind of like, once you have that mandate, it's their obligation and their authority to move forward with whatever they think is best. And if you want to touch on that with like the, I don't know, social media, like recommendations in terms of getting that out there.
I think probably one of the biggest problems is just that a lot of the media, a lot of the articles that have been posted about Parent Revolution is a lot of negative stuff, which is kind of disheartening because I think this is a really great organization. But there has been a lot of criticism, a lot of rumors that have been spreading around. And I think the best way to really combat that is to have, you know, a solid PR department within the organization just to be able to get stuff out. And that we were talking about the idea of creating videos and informational videos to spread out to the parents, to be able to inform parents, kind of give them the perspective on the Parent Revolution side. We know that there was the documentary that was made, and I think that's really great. And hopefully, you know, if we can get that out as soon as possible, just to be able to have something that's from your side and not just, it's, because right now it's a very one-sided argument. Right now it's what people are saying about you. There's not a lot about what you say about yourself, so what parents say about you. And so to be able to do that, hopefully that would be able to balance out what the public's attitude towards you.
I have a question. You mentioned the strengthening the relationship between parent signatures and the school transformation. What do you specifically think about that?
I think that a lot of it has to do with like branding, just basically that mandate that's kind of, it's definitely still a struggle like moving forward and increasing past around 70% of signatures, but like if that's what you're hitting and the law says that you only need 50, kind of just emphasizing that and kind of showing that it is like within their authority and kind of just they should be moving forward with what they think is best once you have that percentage of a school who wants to transform it, just making that like a key part of your approach moving forward.
Basically leveraging the strength of that vote.
Yeah, like before it even starts, just once you're kind of coming into contact with the administration and they're resistant to give you anything, and it's like, well, you already don't really, they make it hard for you as it is, and you'll still go and get 70% of their signatures, and I don't know, just emphasizing that.
I think that's important long-term from a policy perspective too, because it's a politically somewhat attractive issue, and that's something that you can leverage. Just the fact that even though you can't reach as many parents as you'd like to, you have a significant amount of support, and they would be supportive of candidates that believe in that as well.
So there was a theme of collaboration that was in each of your presentations, I believe. And within the two case studies you talked about, there was an effort, collaboration was able to be achieved in those instances. But I think it's clear that collaboration is not always possible. One possible reason for that, I would argue, is that in defining stakeholders who deserve to have a seat at the table, you can define stakeholders by their interests or by their expertise. We, I think, define stakeholders by their interests, and parents have an interest that is non-replicable by other stakeholders, and thus they deserve a seat at the table. But there is clearly arguments from people who oppose our efforts to say that stakeholders should be defined by expertise and parents, and in their views, parents don't have an expertise. And so those are mutually, like those are irreconcilable principal differences. How would you address seeking collaboration in an instance like that where there are irreconcilable value differences about who deserves to be a part of the conversation?
I think, well, to begin with, keep in mind that Parent Revolution and these parent unions chapters are, compared to previous organizations, they're relatively new. So in some cases, we're still in like infant stages compared to other organizations. And so the most important thing is to keep these parents united collectively within one another and make sure they have a clear agenda on what they want to do. And as long as they can do that, they can start increasing the numbers of parents that want to join them or support the cause of reforming schools. And I see that later on, as long as their voices are heard within districts and communities, that can trickle down to district members, board members, and they're going to start paying attention. This is what I see in the future, and you also can look at Shannon, where she got elected. This can lead, parents will have some sort of vote. And as long as this information gets out and parents start buying into, kids first policy, then it's gonna start going around and parents are just starting to get relatively more power, per se, in this topic that we're talking about.
I think that you guys actually, as an organization, kind of help in terms of solving that problem. You guys create these parent unions, you go with these parents, you work with them, you teach them what an API score is. We had a chance to talk with both parents from Lennox and from 24th Street, and both of them said that what was the most beneficial thing that Parent Revolution brought to the table was the fact that they informed these parents about the current situation of the school. They taught them how to read an API score, these academic performances, these different statistics, and to help them realize, what's actually going on at their school. And then what you're talking about in terms of expertise, these parents aren't just people who have been sitting by and all of a sudden you guys reach them and say, oh, there's something wrong with your school. And they're like, oh, yeah, I totally knew that. They have been involved with these schools for a very, very long time. There's a reason why these schools have PTAs, we have parent volunteers. So while they might not have expertise in like a broader level kind of about education in general, they have a lot of expertise on what's going on in the actual school. And I think that's reason enough for them to be able to say, these parents have been working at these schools for years, these children have been going to these schools for years. How can you not say that they don't have expertise, that they don't know what's going on in the school, what they think should be going on, what they think should be changed at the schools? I think it's valid. I think just because the fact that they don't have a master's in education or they haven't been working in education for years and years and years doesn't mean that they don't have a valid opinion.
Also, just to challenge your conception of the word expertise, I think it's important to emphasize that these are failing schools, failing in the country, failing in the state, and even failing within the district. So someone who's leading that school, I don't think that they classify as an expert. And as much as you you don't want to make this about dirty campaigning, for someone who wants to keep a school that way, they're exposing you for your agenda, expose them for theirs.
You talked about comparing it to Chicago campaigns.
Yes.
Other campaigns. You didn't go into a lot of detail about what were the outcomes.
Oh yeah, so some of these campaigns are similar to the situations here. A lot of districts weren't willing to listen to parents, ignore them, but there are some small, minor cases where they did work out, that they were willing to listen to these parents. And I just did some, read through these cases and see what kind of info sessions or workshops that they provided. And I kind of just took some bits and pieces here and try to put on here our case and with Parent Revolution and these parent union chapters. And one thing that I saw from their workshops that the key is to remain calm and collective, that don't be confrontational, because if you're confrontational, then you're going to lose the legitimacy of these parent unions. And so as we talked about earlier, to increase the power to establish this, you have to remain calm and try to negotiate with these districts, even though they might not listen to you. If they see that you guys, parents, are making an effort, that they have a clear agenda, then they're going to start listening. People outside of the district, like people, media, they're going to start looking at, oh, these parent unions are actually doing something that's very important, and that should lead to, that's going to get the attention of the district members and the school board.
Yes, I have one more question. I want to preface it with a comment. First, that this has been awesome, and a lot of the recommendations you guys are making me very happy, because a lot of them are things that we've kind of talked about or are getting the ball rolling on, so it makes me feel like we're moving in a good direction to kind of hear that validated by a lot of what you're saying. Second, thank you for putting up with our challenging questions. We're asking you some of the questions that we tackle every day and don't have answers to, so thank you for that. So, that being said, my next question is, you've talked about the importance of making like a district-wide organization, which is definitely something that we're pushing for in Lennox and we're pushing for in LAUSD more broadly, which is more of a challenge because LAUSD is obviously not one community in the way that Lennox is. So my question is honestly to get your thoughts on, there's kind of two ways of thinking about that, of parents just kind of coming together and forming their own kind of district-wide organization from all these different parents' unions, or having an actual parent revolution umbrella over all of that, and all of these parents' unions being part of parent revolution parent unions. And so it's on the one hand, it's a branding question, like should parent revolution be an umbrella for all the parents' unions, and should we connect them all in that way? Or should they be connected really just on a district by district basis? And in that sense, how do you make LAUSD work?
I think our approach generally tends towards leaving the parents eventually at some point to be on their own, to let them teach them, inform them, empower them to be able to do all of these things without the help of parent revolution. Like everything that you guys do is amazing, but it seems like your goal as well somewhat is to make sure that they are self-sufficient. So maybe from a foundational perspective, using parent revolution as a mechanism with parents that are already involved to bring them together, but eventually creating that as a self-sustaining organization, I think is, with our approach, probably what we would recommend.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like we keep going back to the example of Shannon, she started off as just a parent, just a parent at Lennox.
The Act has changed the dynamic of parent engagement in the sense of parents could always submit petitions, but now, at least through the parent petition process, they have to be listened to, right? In the last 2 to 3 months, Warren Fletcher, the president of UTLA, the teachers union for the LA area, publicly announced an intention by him and his organization to seek changes to the law. And he's also, in a separate public statement, said that he does not like the law. He wishes it would go away, more or less. So I think it's reasonable for us to expect over the next legislative session, which starts next month, that UTLA and allies will seek to get rid of the law. What arguments would you make to legislators and to the public that this law needs to remain for parents to keep the power that they have had for the past 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it builds up on like what we were talking before about expertise and like who you want to lead these districts, and kind of just re-emphasizing the fact that these are persistently failing schools and they are ranked lowest kind of just in all these different ways. And if there's like, if you guys are proving that change is possible when you give parents a seat at the table, kind of just going back on like the revolution aspect of it, where it starts with something small, but then it becomes kind of a voice at the table empowerment. Like Shannon Thomas Allen got elected to the school board kind of on her own. Like what you guys are doing is making permanent changes where parents can do this on their own and kind of taking off those training wheels. And I think that that's kind of like fails to be like any sort of like agenda that you have. It's kind of just like allowing them to make these changes on their own to like at the point where you don't really have to get involved with it anymore.
I think what Claire said before is very valid too. Like, what argument do they have to make that if the school is failing and we can fix it, then why would you not let that happen?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that probably one of the main reasons why UTLA is so against the law is not because they don't want to create better schools, but because this law sometimes endangers these teacher unions, right? Because sometimes when you choose a certain turnaround model, these teachers have a chance to be fired. And so to be able to address their issue, maybe it's not, they don't think the law is a good idea, but because they're trying to protect their teachers' best interest, be able to address that and say, because we know that, the law may be in question, and if there is a possibility, we have recommended some regulations, tweaking the law a little bit. If, you do in the future start working on that, maybe think about that as kind of one of the things that you want to work on, in order to kind of create what we've been saying, kind of a sense of collaboration instead of, we're going to come into the school and fire all your teachers, but really more focusing on we want to work together and make sure, also, I'm sure you don't want to be attacking the unions. Hopefully you can kind of present a united front and be able to say, we want to work with you. We're not against you, we want to work with you. I think that in the end that your goals are still the same. You know, they're teachers. They want to teach children. They want to give these children a better education. If you can kind of come up on some common ground, then hopefully, you know, they wouldn't be attacking you so much.
Great, very good. Well, thank you all very much. Great job.